I stood up at 4 a.m. on 584 days. These days were not consecutive, but I think it doesn't matter that much. Of course, it would be nicer if these were consecutive days and I still would be standing up every single day after 10 years, but this is not the case. So I think, instead of just saying that I failed if I didn't stand up on a given day at 4 a.m., I just say, okay, let's try the next day. And there is no potential downside to breaking the chain, because if you break the chain of a habit, then the potential problem is that once you break it, you have this kind of all or lose mindset. If you didn't make it, then everything is not worth pursuing anymore. And this is a potential problem you have whenever you try to track habits, but then you just don't do it on one single day. And this mindset, even though it is, I think, abundantly clear that it is not rational, because the only thing you have to do over time is increase the frequency of a given habit, such as standing up at 4 a.m. every single day. So, a few years back, I realized that if I stood up earlier, that I could potentially do more. I mean, this consideration is something many people probably already thought about. But, of course, this consideration is only true if you assume a few of the following things. First of all, if you stand up earlier, then this is time you gain. Of course, it is not actually time you gain, because if you assume that a given person actually is a rational actor and already has a few things in their life figured out and is not a total mess, then we assume the given person sleeps the same amount of hours every single night. So if you then stand up earlier, what you're not doing is you're not gaining more time, but instead you're just replacing time in the evening with time in the morning. So now the question that needs to be asked is not whether standing up earlier gives you more time, but whether standing up earlier influences your life and your decisions over a given day in a way that you actually get more done. So now let's think of what is actually happening in the morning. In the morning, the earlier you stand up, the less people are awake. If you stand up at midnight, who are the people who are awake at midnight? Potentially party people. So if you now switch to 2 a.m., then potentially, if you are in a city, for example, then you meet, if you, for example, stand up and you go outside right after standing up. At midnight, you potentially meet people that are partying. At 2 a.m., you are potentially meeting people that are partying or have been partying and are on their way home, maybe puking onto the street or on the sideway. If you then switch to 3 a.m., maybe you already catch some of the early risers. Of course, almost nobody stands up at 3 a.m., but at 4 a.m., for example, maybe the litter service or the domestic refuse collection, so basically the people who get the garbage in front of your house, might already be on their way to your home. The next question is, according from this thing I just mentioned, and I will also discuss way more, but actually way more, is that there is a concept I developed for myself, kind of just for decision making for myself, and I call this time exposure to people. That's not really what I call it, I just came up with it. But I just said the previous sentence, so therefore I had to end this previous sentence with time exposure, social thing. What is it? It's this principle. And here's another concept I developed. It's this thing called, I don't have a name for it. If you consider space, then space on Earth is spherical. Of course, if you only take a look at a very singled out piece of space, then it is not spherical, but it actually is just a plane. So now, let's go back to the spherical thing. How do you meet people? That's the essential question we are trying to answer. You can meet people in two ways, and you cannot meet people in two ways. You have two dimensions that have to be right in order to meet a person. You have to meet a person at the right space, but also at the right time, so location and time. Imagine, for example, the Earth again. And on this Earth we have a given city, let's say. And now, if I wanted to meet Charles, the big one, I don't know what the English proper translation. His name is actually Charlemagne, but let's switch to but to a simpler example, because many might not know the forefather of the German and also the French people. Let's say you want to meet a saber-toothed tiger. Apart from this being a tongue breaker due to the saber tooth, there is one problem you have. If you are at a given location where usually a saber-toothed tiger appears out of thin air, in the morning for example, in the evening, because saber-toothed tigers don't exist anymore, you cannot meet them anymore. So therefore we have these two dimensions which have to be right for any given occurrence that happens between two people or between two anythings. They have to meet in space but also in time. But now, since time is usually linear and also unidirectional, meaning it doesn't go into two ways, you cannot travel back in time, you can potentially increase or slow down the speed of time, but what you cannot do is go back. So therefore we can never meet this saber-toothed tiger. And now the potential problem is the same, or at least the scenario is the same, for the sphere. If for the sphere, that is the Earth, is currently where we actually meet people, of course you could potentially also meet people on the ISS station in space, but let's just assume most people live on Earth. So now, how could you display something like space and time in the same model? You could use the Earth sphere as year zero. So year zero is basically the ground. And then with every single second, for example, you move up 1 meter. And now you have the sphere of the Earth, and then you have billions of seconds, which are bigger spheres. So basically what you have to do in order to meet the saber-toothed tiger, you have to get into the sphere on this single point on the Earth, where this single point on the Earth is the point where the saber-toothed tiger once occurred at this point in time. So you have to choose your point and then choose the height or the sphere above this point. Now, if you think about meeting people, then the same concept applies. You can only meet people in space and in time at the same time. So it's not one or the other, but it's a function that is an and function. We need both in order to meet somebody. Now, if you want to meet the people who collect your garbage, and just because they collect the garbage and they are called garbage men, or I don't know the proper word, let's actually see. It is actually the bin man or the garbage man. Just because they have this name doesn't mean they have a crappy job, or that they don't enjoy their job, or that we should look down upon them as a society, because they are also just doing their job, actually a very nice job and a very helpful job, because otherwise we would have lots of trash everywhere, not only in the sea. So now, in order to meet people, what you actually have to do, you probably already guessed it at this point in time, you have to meet people at the right time specifically. Of course also at the right place. But given now, everybody has a special routine. Let's say every person on this earth had a routine that it follows every single day. Then you could actually draw this routine out. So maybe here is the home, and then they would move here, which is the workspace, and then they would go to the gym. And sometimes, on some days, which is not possible because we assume everybody has the same route every single day, then they go to the theater and then they go back home. And this is kind of the circle. So now, in order for two people to meet, these circles or these routes have to interfere. And not only interfere in some way, but let's just assume they have to interfere on a 1 by 1 meter square, because this is how we meet people, not by them being 100 meters away. Let's just assume 1 by 1 meter. And now what is happening is that we have these circles. So let's just say we have route 1, which is this here, and then route 2. And now, again, on the Earth, what actually happens is that here we have the first one, and here we have the second one. Every circle, basically every single day, or let's just switch the model. Instead of every single second being a sphere on top of the other sphere on Earth, based on the Earth, we just switch to a day. So therefore now, if two people actually want to meet, and each person has the same route every single day, which not everybody has, but many people do the same routes every single day, I guess. So to a certain extent, this at least is true, and actually to a very big extent, I would argue. Then we have a sphere for every single day, and now on every single day, one person draws basically a line on this sphere, and then on the next line, and then on the next line, until it goes out till infinity. And now for two people to meet on a given day, now it is more difficult because in a given day, not everybody who is at one place stays there for 24 hours, so now we have to switch back to the 1 second thing. Let's just assume 1 by 1 meter for 1 second is a meeting, a human meeting. Then over the time span of 24 hours, we could assume that this thing that is around in 2 dimensions is actually in 3 dimensions. So we would again draw basically in 3 dimensions and for 24 hours. What I'm trying to say with this is that it is very difficult actually to meet the right people. And therefore, if you, for example, decide that you want to be a morning person and you want to change your circle of friends to people that are morning persons, then the best way to meet those people is not in an internet forum online, maybe it is also, but what if you just stood up earlier? And therefore the only people you actually met are people that are actually already up. So what we just have done is we filtered the people and we used our time and space continuum as a filter. By being at the right space, at the right location, in the right time, we actually meet exactly the people that do the same thing because they're also here. If you go to the gym at the same time every single week, then over time you will only meet the people, or the people that you meet and that will become maybe acquaintances will be the people that have the exact same schedule as you do. And if there is a person, for example, who switches up his gym schedule every second week, and you do the same schedule every single week, then this decreases your time spent together in the gym by half, because the one person is changing their schedule maybe on a 2-day basis. 1 day gym, 1 day off. And since the week has 7 days and is therefore not even, over time you meet this person only every second week. And therefore, the likelihood of you becoming friends is just less, because it's just time you spend together is just decreased by 50% actually. But the other way around, if you now have the same schedule, then this time is increased, at least to comparing it to the other example, by 100%. And now coming back, not full circle yet, partial circle you could say, to why standing up at 4 a.m. is so useful. It's because of this concept. Because in the evening, if you take 2 hours in the evening, let's say you usually sleep 6 hours, which is either from midnight till 6 or it is from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Then by taking these 2 hours and switching them to the morning hours, you are encountering the morning people only. And since many people are not morning people, at least not 4 a.m. morning people, this means in the morning almost nobody is up. And therefore, the likelihood of you partying in the morning, if you partied, for example, from 10 p.m. to 0 p.m., not to 0 p.m. but to midnight, or if you just have this time in your daily schedule, then this just makes it much more likely that you party. Of course, you will also meet less people within the sociable time. And this also is true for other instances. For example, if you only eat dinner, for example, then of course you will not meet somebody in the mensa, in the cafeteria, because you just don't eat at this point in time. Therefore, making dinner, for example, your meal of the day, if you are on a schedule like 1 meal a day, makes, at least in terms of being socially kind of acceptable or meeting new people, kind of sense. And now, if you replace the last 2 hours of the day, then also something else happens, because your focus over the time of a given day is not the same. It actually goes up and down and up and down and up and down, depending on how tired you are, based on when you actually stood up, so based on the time that passed in between you standing up and the time it is now. But there is also this other thing called the circadian rhythm that makes us alert and makes us less alert. If we are at night and it's dark outside, then the circadian rhythm usually makes us less alert. If it is 4 a.m. and it's summer, then the light may already be out, the sun may already be out. Of course not actually at 4 a.m. most of the time, but maybe at 4:30, maybe at 5 a.m., maybe at 6 a.m. So therefore, you also get just more light in a given day, because if you sleep when the sun is already up, in the summer or in the winter, not so much in most countries, actually just the countries that are north of the equator, not just, but many countries like Europe, for example. If Europe would be a country, Europe isn't, but since Europe is north of the equator, we also have a lot less sun in winter, at least in the morning and in the evening. So now in the summer again, and also switching daytime of course makes, or daylight saving time makes a difference. But what I'm trying to say is, if you sleep when the sun is already up, then of course you replace it with time when the sun is already down, given the sun is not up all of your waking hours, despite what you actually are doing. Which is sometimes true, for example, for northern countries, where there is like this winter, which is the sun never goes up, and then there is summer. It's called polar winter and polar summer, I guess. Now, practical effects of this. I try to stand up at 4 a.m. every single day. I don't, usually. In the last few days, I did, actually. And this is also the reason I'm making this video and don't feel like a total fraud, because in the past, at least, I almost 600 days stood up at 6 a.m. Not at 6 a.m., but at 4 a.m. I also, of course, sometimes stand up at 4:30, but that just doesn't count then. The actual rule I have implemented for myself, that I have to be awake for the next 20 minutes, so from 4 to 4:20, and this is then when it counts. Of course, you could make up different rules. You could also say you have to be awake for the next 20 hours, or for the next 10 hours, or for the next 2 hours, for this rule to make it count, but I think this is a fairly reasonable assumption I made, that if I'm awake for the next 20 minutes, that, well, I am at least awake for the next 20 minutes, and then the likelihood of me going to bed again decreases, because for 20 minutes I can't do much if I don't just sit on my phone and scroll through my phone and then go to bed again. But if I actually stand up and do something, then 20 minutes probably already increases my alertness drastically, and this means the day is safe because I stood up again, once again, at 4 a.m. How I actually did this within the last days is I installed a time clock. And this time clock switches on my headlights in my studio, and if they switch on, then alertness, according to Andrew Huberman, is one of the main causes for being alert. Not alertness, but light exposure. So it switches on all of my lights, basically, apart from the lights I control with switches on the wall. And this means it is just bright, and therefore it just makes you more alert compared to a morning where there is no sun and also no light. And also it is easier because it's one less additional step I have to do, because the light is already switched on. Problems. Of course, I didn't list all the benefits and all the effects, but we now get into problems because that's what I'm currently thinking about. And it's me producing the video, so we're following my train of thought, actually. If you switch the last 2 hours of the day, for me it would be 10 p.m. to midnight, because I also sleep 2 hours during the day, which is something I made up, and something that probably is not very in line with the circadian rhythm, but at least it kind of optimizes my psychology. I could also get into this system, into this 4+2 system, similar to the 4+2 treaty Germany actually made with the Allied. I think it is called 4+2. Nobody knows about this apart from Germans. What I'm trying to say is that it is very complicated if you sleep at 10. I tried this. I tried this in the past. I tried to stand up at 5, at 6, and then I tried to get to bed at sometimes at 11, sometimes at 10:30, sometimes at 10 p.m. And it didn't really work because I wasn't consistent. And because I wasn't consistent, I basically had to make exceptions every now and then. And if every now and then turns into I usually have to make exceptions, then your whole day, if this multiplies, and it's not only this scenario and this decision rule and this decision you have to make, but also when you go buy groceries, or when you actually go to school, or when you actually go to work. If you could decide at any given point anything, then it is very complicated to make any decision. So by using constraints, such as I go to bed at the same time, which is also very beneficial in terms of optimizing sleep, then you just have less decision options. Therefore, the decisions you make are within a very constrained space, mathematically speaking. If there are two variables, the one is, let's say, the 24 hours of the day, and the other one is how much you drink. Now, many would argue it would make sense to drink every 10 minutes, and therefore you would have a very consistent drinking consumption or water consumption. But of course, this is not how it works. We drink when we are awake, usually, so this already takes 8 hours off the schedule. So from these 24 hours, we already decreased it to this space, for example. And now, if you additionally also don't want to drink 3 liters at the same time, then it's not only this direction in which the space decreases, but also this direction. So you end up with either, very simplified, for example, a rectangle in the middle. Maybe it is here, this rectangle, where you actually drink. Of course, in terms of drinking, there will be multiple times a day at which you drink, but they will be within this constrained space. And this is called the solution space. So now what you are doing by making a decision to go to bed at the same time every single day, what you're actually doing is you are constraining the possible solutions to a given problem. And since your brain is not a very good computer, it is actually, of course, it's the best thing, it's the most complex thing we know in the current universe, at least according to our knowledge. It is still very bad at making decisions. And you can't just do random things with your brain, but your brain is actually very limited, I at least find every now and then. So at least my brain is very limited. I don't know about you specifically. So now, by constraining things in your life, you make room to basically move within this constrained space, because it is actually much easier to move within this constrained space. And so therefore, over time, at least in my eyes, really makes sense to try to stick to a schedule. And therefore, the sleep schedule or the waking and the bedtime should be as consistent as possible over time. So therefore, a schedule which I usually, within a given week, for example, on the weekdays, compared to the holiday, not compared to the holidays, maybe also compared to the holidays, but compared to the weekends, for example, which I have to break again and again and again, is just not a very good schedule. So I tried the schedule of going to bed at 10, at 10:30, at at 11. I actually am laughing how ridiculous this was that I just thought I could make a decision. Because I had the system, for example, I would go to bed at 10 usually. But if I wanted to have another social hour, because parties are usually at night and social gatherings are usually at night, and if a social gathering is at night, it doesn't end at 9, and then you can go to bed and brush your teeth and maybe shower. So therefore, it wasn't only 5 minutes I usually didn't make, but maybe it was an hour. So therefore I had two options, a two-option system, which already is much simpler than deciding at which point of the party, for example, you actually want to go home, and then which bedtime you want to hit. Because you could go at any point in time. You could go now, or a second later, or a second later. So basically, by constraining, for example, that you can only go or leave the party in 10-minute intervals, you already make it far easier, because if you have to make only one decision every 10 minutes. So now let's say you simplify this even further. You could say 20 minutes. Then you only have to make one decision every 20 minutes. Compared to every single second, this amounts to quite some decisions. And if in terms of bedtime, for example, you instead of going to bed now, or now, or now, or now, decide that you only want to go to bed at full hours, you simplify the 3,600 possible decisions you could make to go to bed now down to one. And this is also something I implemented, not only in terms of my sleep schedule, at least my theoretic sleep schedule, because my practical one is all over the place. But I think it makes sense at least to have an ideal plan. A plan to which I can stick to, a plan to which I can return to, and a plan I, at least in the past, did again and again and again. So therefore I know if I haven't changed that much for the worse, I can actually do this plan. And if I still am able to, for example, live with 6 sleeping hours plus 20 additional minutes, which is not something I usually can do, but I still haven't figured out how to maybe switch to 7 hours, because I just want. Oh man, I'm just laughing at myself because I'm so ridiculous. Back to the 11 p.m. and 10 p.m. bedtimes. So what I tried to do was to decide only once in a given evening at least at which time I would go to bed. And of course this had an effect if it had an effect on my rising time, on my waking up time, because if I have a fixed amount of hours I can sleep, or I should sleep, then going to bed 1 hour earlier or later actually means that you stand up 1 hour earlier or later. And this also means that your entire routine changes. You basically have 2 entire day routines. Because if you can do a given specific number of tasks in a given specific number of hours every single day, and ideally now we just assume these are the same things you do every single day. Let's just assume for a normal work day. Usually you probably go to either school, university, or you also just go to work every single day, ideally the same. Of course, maybe on Friday you leave the office earlier, but the more identical these things are, the less you have to think about them. That's the whole purpose of the whole world basically doing 8 hours every single day, usually, in terms of work, because then the whole world is awake at the same time. Of course it isn't because of the time differences, but at least in a given country, within a given time zone, it is the same thing. This results in 1,000 people company having the ability to in space and also in time meet and then to cooperate with each other and make something big. Back to the schedule of 11 and 10 p.m. The problem with the schedule was that if I, for example, went to bed later, and also I think I later on tried this with 11 p.m. and 12, basically midnight. The problem is that if you go to bed later, in the morning, usually you cannot trust yourself. That's what I learned. I cannot trust my morning me to decide at which point of time I should stand up. So what often happened is that instead of the 5, so I had 6 hours, that was the sleep I gave myself. And then I had to stand up either at 5 if I went to bed at 11, or at midnight. If I went to bed at midnight, I would have to stand up at 6. So now, because I had this thing, I had to remember morning me, that is probably way dumber than normal me, or than actual alert me, had to make the decision every single time, and had to also remember when I went to bed. And now compare similar situations, and then you just, when did I get to bed yesterday, and what consequence does this have for me right now, and what consequence does this have for the rest of the given day and the tasks I wanted to accomplish. And maybe I need to go to the airport today, but then if I go to the airport, at which time do I need to go to bed? And many people just make this decision of when to go to bed in order for the things for the next day to occur every single day. So I decided I wanted to create a plan that would be the most consistent for the rest of my life. That basically the need for adjustment should be as minimal as possible. So I devised up a plan where I would go to bed at midnight. And then I would stand up at 4 again. And since I also wanted to implement something else, which is eating not in the morning and usually also not at lunch, maybe in the late afternoon, so eating twice or even once a given day, I decided that I would also sleep during lunch hours, because then I would just not be tempted in the lunch hours, because at 2 p.m. everybody is already working again, and everybody's already up. If I'm working in a company, for example, of course I could only do this because I didn't study at university anymore at this point in time. So this was the only reason I could do this, and also because You have to have some kind of flexibility, I guess, in order to sleep 2 hours during the day. So for most people, something that maybe works better is to sleep till 6. And to not stand up at 4 a.m. but at 6 a.m. And that's kind of the standard thing everybody does, I guess. Go to bed at 11 to midnight and then go up at 6. Wake up at 6. So now, what I effectively am doing is I am removing the last 2 hours of the day, and I am replacing them not with the morning hours, because I already have the morning hours, but I'm replacing these last 2 hours of the day with the lunch hours. That's what I'm effectively doing by applying the system. I sleep from 0 to 4, which is the time. So if you took all the sleep schedules of all the people on this planet and you overlaid them and maybe made them black, so the blacker some things are, so basically if you assume a given person sleeps during these hours in the middle here of the day, or in the morning, for example, from midnight to 4, then here we have a black thing here. And then we overlay all the other things. And then we just take a look at what the color actually is. You could also say that every single bar is the word I'm searching for, has a certain depth. So you could also layer them on top of each other. And then if you layer them on top of each other, that's actually what a normal graph is doing. So then you would have the average sleeping time of all the people. And if this were 2 dimensions, this is 0 and this is 24 hours, then it would probably look like something like this, and then going up again in the evening. And so the schedule that now is ideal, because let's just assume you are a company and you want to provide services like a bus. Then the more people are awake at a given point in time, the more likely it is they will actually book at this specific time, for this specific time. And the same is true for any given other thing that relies on people being awake. So therefore, the schedule that is the most applicable, at least in terms of this variable, is the one that has the most overlay with the schedule of all the other people. Of course, now time zones make this thing again ridiculous, but only if you are traveling all the time, which you aren't. So you are staying in the same location, usually, I guess. Most people are. This now means I just said, okay, most people are probably in bed at midnight. So also I will be. But in terms, for the scenario that I actually want to go out, I don't need to be in bed by 10. I don't need to be in bed by 11. But because I'm usually also awake till midnight, which is pretty late for most people, because most people go to bed a little bit earlier if they are not partying, I can stay up. Example, yesterday I went out, I met up with a few people, and I could leave at 11, and then I got to bed in time. Even though I still had to go home, I still had to brush my teeth, I still had to basically, that's it. And then I could go to bed at midnight, which was very nice, because I enjoyed both the benefits of being able to go out, of being able to also enjoy dinner out, for example, if I want to, with my 1 meal a day. And this also, the 1 meal a day thing also means that I'm basically overlaying the social time and the eating time, at least in theory, if I would go out and cook with friends, for example, which is usually happening in the evening because most people have something to do in the day. And if you're not in a living situation where there are multiple people and you can also eat with your friends in the morning or with your family, then you have to align schedules all the time. And if you're not living in the same house, then it is not really possible to just eat breakfast together, just randomly, I guess. Because most people have some time that they can manually adjust somehow, usually in the evening. Now, wouldn't it also be nice if such a system didn't only result in the benefits we already discussed, but also in the benefits of making time calculations in your head very easy? What if you divided time into segments of 10 minutes? And you would have 6 of these segments within a given hour. And you would have a certain amount of hours in a given day. Let's say 24 hours, which is time we usually have. And then you deduct 6 hours, and it's still even numbers, which is very nice. Because you basically have only half the numbers if you have only even numbers. So we have 18 hours. And then within these 18 hours you are awake, you could then set the priorities from your life. And then you could see how many tasks you do, or how much time you spend doing something for a specific task, for a specific overall goal. And this then would lead you towards realizing that these two things are connected inherently. That on the one side, the task we want to achieve, or the goal, the objective we want to achieve, is inherently linked to the given time we spend doing this in a given day. The more time you spend doing something for something, this was just another one of my automations kicking in, because it just was time. It is basically lunchtime, and this means I usually sleep, and I'm still recording a video. What I'm trying to say is, wouldn't it be nice if you just said, okay, you had 8 effective working hours in a given day, and these 8 effective working hours in a given day would be divided into 2 slots, a 4-hour slot in the morning and a 4-hour slot in the afternoon. And then you would have additional time in the morning. And in the morning you tried to also standardize a few things, like maybe cleaning your apartment, for example, which is something I do in the morning. Because then my apartment is clean and I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the day. Of course, I could also do already the important work in the morning, and this is still an internal discussion, at least I have with myself, if I should switch basically the first deep working phase of 4 hours to the morning hours. But there are also these other things you have to do in the morning, because it takes a few minutes to get out of bed usually, and to be alert and to make your bed. So therefore, if I would start this first 4-hour deep work session at 4, I just would not be ready. So therefore, I wouldn't have the full 4 hours, and this makes it again very hard to calculate things. Because if it's then 3 hours and 50 minutes or 3 hours and 35 minutes, this just makes it difficult. So therefore, I just assume that I have 10 minutes in a given task. And the shortest unit of time I use is 10 minutes. So then what I additionally do is I say, wouldn't it be nice if things started at full hours? So I go to the gym at a full hour. This doesn't necessarily mean that I start the gym then at the full hour, because I'm arriving at the gym at maybe 20 minutes after the full hour. But I'm finishing the gym again with showering at the full hour again. I'm also sleeping at a full hour, at midnight usually. I also stand up at a full hour. So therefore, I simplified these hours I can do things, and also the smaller time slots I can do things in, to standardized time slots, and then I don't have to make 3,600 decisions, potentially, every single second. Not every single second, but every single hour, but I instead only have to make one in a given hour for a specific task. What changes in such a day? If I stand up at 4, I achieved already something most people aren't capable of. Of course, this is very dumb thinking. It's competitive thinking. But if I'm awake during these hours, then I just feel like I'm better than these people. Of course, only in a comedic way now. I don't actually go and take a look at the people and say these are bad people, because they also have the reasons, I guess, for why they are not awake. They maybe just have a different schedule. So, but this feeling you have that you are alone, and the whole world at this point in time is quiet. At 4 a.m. it is one of the most quietest times, I would say, apart from the actual night hours I have for myself that are from midnight till 4. It's quiet. Usually at 6, maybe at 7, people begin to work, cars begin to drive by. And also, I do things like I go for a run. Usually I start at 6, and this means I'm out usually at 6:10, for example, and then I run for 20 minutes, or usually only 10 minutes. It is 10 minutes actually. And at this time, I don't have to really look for cars, because there are just almost no cars out, at least in winter. So this means that I can run in the city very efficiently, and I don't have to wait for lights all the time, even though you probably should wait for lights. But what I'm trying to say, and also, if I run, for example, at 6, then there are almost no people on the sideways. I can just race on the sideways, potentially also run on the street, if it is a very small street maybe. So by doing these things, you essentially are changing how you live a given day. And by changing how you live a given day for the rest of your life, and also by living this day, you are changing. And even if yesterday was completely different, if you stand up in the morning, you kind of are a different person this morning. And this is something I realized. It's almost like a different persona, because if you have these successes in the early morning, that you also did this and 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 this, and over the course of a given day, you just get happier and happier and happier. Not really happier and happier, but your task list, the list of things you did, just grows and grows and grows. And in the evening, you are just done. And being done with something, knowing that you did the right thing, is the one thing that prevents from overthinking. It's the one thing that prevents me from constantly worrying about my future, is actually having done something about this specific problem, and also knowing that I have done it, and that I don't need to do it now again. Because let's say, for example, you want to completely overhaul your finances. Then, if this is your main priority, then take holidays and do it for the next 3 weeks. But that's not usually how it works. So, if you want to solve a problem, you have to solve this problem over time. So now the question is, how much time of a given day should be attributed towards solving this problem? And because our mind plays games on us all the time, we often think that we need to spend way more time, that this is just so much more important. I often think everything is so much more important than the thing I'm currently doing. No, the other way around. I often think that the thing I'm currently doing is the most important thing ever. And this perspective is an illusion, I think. It's an illusion because we are just driven by the dopamine that is given out more and more by the current task we are doing. So often, for example, I think just before trying to go for a workout, I just think, oh yeah, just if I did this and this and this, and then this problem would be solved a little bit further, which is very nice, because this means that I could also potentially work longer. But if you don't cut it off now, your brain will cut it off at some point in time, because you will just be less alert at some point in the future. You will just need to eat. You will just need to sleep. And therefore, control, or the rational part of our mind, or willpower, is just needed to cut off things even though they are still fun. The same is true for the party, maybe. It is more fun over time for the next 10 years to maybe not stay an additional 10 minutes at the party, even though you said you would leave at this point in time, compared to when you wouldn't do it. So, to now give some kind of conclusion of why I did this, is because I wanted this time in the morning. I realized the earlier I stood up, the better I felt during a given day, actually. Also, in the evening, I just had less things to worry about because I was just so much more productive. And also think about this. At any given point of the day, you already did a few things. You already achieved a few things. You already achieved so and so many tasks. Now, if you compare yourself to the person, so you now create a clone of yourself who does the exact same thing, but wakes up 2 hours later, then at any given point of the day, you are 2 hours ahead of the alternative version of you, which at any given point makes you basically better than this other alternative, because the other alternative is that, or your alternative is 2 hours late all the time for the rest of his life. And by shifting your schedule to 4 a.m., you are now 2 hours awake compared to the 6 hours. You're not 2 hours awake, but you're 2 hours ahead at any given point in the day. Not only compared to yourself, but compared to everybody else. So if you stand up at 4 a.m. and let's say there is a big project that is coming up, one person stands up at 6, one person stands up at 8, one person stands up at 10. The person that stands up at 4, and theoretically, let's say the project starts at 2 p.m. and the person that stands up at 4 Or let's just say the project starts at lunchtime. The person who stands up at 4 and now would, in theory at least, work from the moment he or she stands up, then until 12 they already would have 8 working hours. And the person who stands up at 6 only has 6 working hours. The person who stands up at 8 only has 4 working hours, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't really give you a competitive advantage, but it also does compared to other people. And since we compare ourselves to other people all the time anyway, why not just use this as a tool in order to maybe feel just a little bit better about ourselves, or to compare it to the version of ourselves that just would stand up later. I am way more happy when I stand up at 4 a.m. if I manage to stand up at 4 a.m. I am, I guess, way more confident, because the confidence is actually based in something that is real. Confidence, I think, is not something you can just believe in or do or somehow create in your mind. It is a function that considers all the things you did and how adherent you are to doing the things you set out to do. And the more adherent you are, let's say 100% adherence, doing the things you set out to do, then you just know that you will do the thing at any given point in the future. If you set out to do something, then you just know you will do something. So why worry about not doing the thing, for example? That's then maybe 100% confidence. Of course, it is also based on other variables, but if we just consider this one thing, then I think it just makes sense that confidence is a function of how well you did the things in the past. People I just tried to switch languages, but it didn't work, and I didn't know if I actually spoke English before. Effectively, if I stand up at 4 a.m. and I live the ideal day, which is not only standing up at 4 a.m., but a lot of other things are connected to this, then over the course of a few days, my life usually takes a completely different trajectory compared to a situation where I don't wake up and I wake up late and I'm late all the time. Because then, if this is then the normal thing you do, then you're always late all the time. And this constantly drains you. It suppresses ideas because you don't have these ideas, because you're constantly worrying about the future and what you might not do at a certain point in the future because you have so many things to do. If there are a fixed set of things you can do within a given day, and you are able to do these things again and again and again, of course the content of these things, these tasks, kind of changes over time, but at least the times in which you can do the tasks actually don't change, because the day is the same every single day, apart from minor things like seasons changing and your age, a lot of other things. But the day is the smallest unit we kind of can perceive, we kind of can enact, we kind of can act in. And therefore, if you stand up earlier at 4 a.m., not only in the short term, but also in the long term, you become somebody else.